This next one says, after more than 20 years of seeking, the noumenon was revealed following a series of events which culminated in the complete dissolution of the mind. So if you haven't heard this term before, noumenon, it's really just a word that I've used myself and heard before. And it just means that which is not perceivable by the senses, that which is not a phenomenon. So it's not an object. It is that space in which our beingness, in which all objects appear, the outer objects and the inner objects of thoughts. So noumenon just really means that which is not a phenomenon. So after more than 20 years of seeking, the noumenon was revealed following a series of events which culminated in the complete dissolution of the mind. But there was no sense of self there with a capital S, no conviction that this was the real me. This was devoid of attribute of any kind and featureless, and there was no sense that the gap that seemed to exist between that and the mind that reinstated itself shortly afterwards could be bridged. But you seem to be saying that this sense of separation can be addressed and the gap closed. How does this happen? How is it done? Thank you. So there's been some kind of revelation for you of that which is not a phenomenon. It's not a thing. It doesn't have any qualities or attributes, as you said. It's not visible, tangible. You can't grasp it with your hands. And yet it is everywhere. It's not actually a form. It's formlessness, noumenon, awareness, whatever we want to call it, or self with a capital S. And when this first happened to me, it was a very similar thing. It didn't feel like anything at all. It felt just like a blank, empty space. It didn't feel, I didn't have an epiphany at that moment that this is really what I am. It was totally opposite to what I expected to find. I'd gone into my self-inquiry for the first time looking for the person that I thought I was, the being that I thought I was. It was living in this body, and found instead this kind of attributeless emptiness, as you said here. So there also, for me, there was no knowing at that time that that's what I really was. And it took me a long time after that to kind of get to that understanding that this is the real me, the noumenon me, rather than a phenomenal idea of myself. And as you said here, there seemed to be a gap between me and it. At the time, there seemed to be a me looking at this attributeless emptiness. And it was only later, as you said, that seemed to close. And then with that, the sense that that is what I really am became prominent and obvious, that this emptiness is my real self. And that out of this emptiness has emerged this kind of phenomenal, imaginary, separate self. So the way that began to occur was for me to really begin to question, as you said here, that this gap can be closed. I'm assuming when you say gap closed, you're really meaning, how do I come to a clear conviction, a certainty without doubt that this is the real me? And for me, this only occurred when I began to question, is there really a me and this emptiness? I'll call it emptiness here, featureless, attributeless emptiness. When I recognized this for the first time, when it sort of presented itself, for want of a better word, there really did seem to be a me and it. And that was emphasized because it seemed to disappear shortly afterwards. As you said, mind came back in and started talking, doing its thing, talking about what I'd seen, talking about how to make that permanent, how to get it back, what I'd done to lose it, and all the things that mind says. And all of this is done, all this talkingness of mind, it is done from the assumption that I'm looking at this emptiness. From my body mind, I'm looking at it. I'm looking as a separate being. There's a me and it. And that's the core thing that you have to question here. When you notice that emptiness, where are you looking at it from? How are you noticing it? Are you looking? You can see, you can notice without eyes, this kind of, you can be aware that there is this emptiness. How are you doing that? And where are you? Are you inside the emptiness as a separate being, outside of it? It feels like we're separate to it. It feels like there's a me and it. And all of our human suffering hangs on that one idea if it's not investigated clearly enough. So this for me became all important. I had to really find out if there was a me and it. All of my seeming existence as a separate being had all hung upon this idea that I was looking at the emptiness. When I really investigated, when I tried to find myself and the emptiness, was there really two? All I found was this emptiness again and again and again, and there was no person in it, or outside of it, or next to it, or underneath it, or behind it, or in front of it, or every which way I looked. There was no separate entity called Helen that was doing the self-inquiry and finding something else, this emptiness. Every single time I looked, I confirmed again and again to myself that there wasn't a me in it. Experientially, I looked, couldn't find me. I just found that. And as we do that, this kind of gap closes, as you said, and it becomes clearer and clearer that I am that. I'm looking from there at my body and mind, not the other way around as it seems. First, it seems I'm looking at the emptiness from my body and mind. And if you want to be doubly sure, check out how you're noticing the emptiness. If it's not perceptible to the senses, how are you recognizing it? You could say, well, I know it's there. I notice it. I'm aware of it. But exactly how can you see something that's invisible? How can you know it's not a thing? Mustn't there be some part of you at least that is the same as this emptiness to recognize it? Your senses and your mind are really good at recognizing forms and the different phenomena and shapes and all of that. How are you recognizing this? And the question that became so important is, am I looking at it or from it? That question changed everything for me. Because if I'm looking at this emptiness, then there's still a me and it. If I don't question that, that assumption will literally be my experience. I will never quite seem to get there and be able to stay there. I'll experience this emptiness, and then it'll just be an experience. It will come and go. And if I am it, it becomes permanent, stable, and effortless. And the phenomena are just kind of going on in front of it, especially thoughts and emotions, or going on inside it, I should say. I hope that helps. And if any of those questions I've suggested really struck a chord there, then grab at it with both hands and, sort of deeply investigate that.